Welcome to the WebORB webinar, 10 Ways to Accelerate Your Application Development and Improve Performance. This is part 2 of a two-part webinar. When part 1 ended, we were talking about WDMF. Let's get back to it. So check out those samples and use WebORB data management for your object relational mapping needs. And that's point number 6. Also, although you're probably watching this video after this happened, we're going to do a webinar specifically on WebORB data management in late November of 2010. So look for that if it isn't already history, and look for the recording of that as well. It'll be posted on our blog, and probably you'll see a link in our newsletter. Number 7, so response caching is a new feature of WebORB for .NET 4.2. It will be coming to the other platforms, Java and PHP, shortly. It's pretty cool. The basic idea is, the whole point is you've got clients, you're trying to get data on the server side, whether it's database data or objects on the server side, whatever. You're going to make a call like this: get user, get something, get car, get states, get something, and you're going to return some data. By putting this lovely little annotation right there, WebORB cache, we're saying cache that data on the client side. The stuff that's returned, cache it on the client side, so that when we call get user again with the same arguments, just return the data that you returned last time, and bypass the whole trip back to the server. And we manage all that caching code so that you don't have to, so that if you call it with different arguments, we hash those arguments and give you back the proper data for those arguments. Now, this only works if your function call is idempotent. Okay, idempotent. That means it gives you the same result whenever it's called with the same arguments. Now, this may be true for your application under different cache scopes. It may be true globally. All right, WebORB cache, in which case we want to set the cache scope to global, or cache scope to session, or maybe by instance. Okay, so that's one variable that you can set with regard to this. Another is timing. You may say that you only want to keep the cache for 5 seconds or 5 minutes or some other short period of time. And this is all described here in the WebORB for .NET documentation, and shortly for the WebORB for Java documentation as well. So look for response caching, and that can really speed up your application performance. It can also speed up your development time, because caching is something that people often end up wanting to do on their clients, and we're doing it for you so that you can leverage our code rather than writing it yourself. Always reuse whenever you possibly can. Now, there's another approach that's not documented yet, but maybe by the time you see this video, which you should look for, which is event-based cache flushing, so that you can write your code so that in addition to these arguments in the WebORB cache annotation, you can also annotate it with the name of an event, and then on the server side functions in your CRUD operations, whenever you're creating or updating or deleting the data, you write the code to send an event, a .NET event, and the get operation is marked with that annotation for that event, so that the event annotation, or the annotation, says when you receive this event, flush the cache. Right? That way you can make sure these things stay properly synchronized. And that's it for response caching. Look for the updated documentation and samples on that. That can speed up your performance and save you development time. Next, after response caching, is WebORB 4.2 for .NET support for nhibernate. Well, nhibernate is .NET version of Hibernate. Support for Hibernate is coming to the next version of WebORB for Java. Hibernate, or nhibernate, is a system for describing the relationships among data elements in a database, so that you can access them from your object-oriented code as efficiently as possible. It's an approach to solving the same object relational mapping problem that WebORB data management solves, but it does so with an existing system, in Hibernate or Hibernate. So it's all documented here in the WebORB documentation, and all this documentation is online. So if you're already using it in Hibernate, we leverage that investment. If you're not, and you just need a quick and very efficient data access scheme from your client, WebORB data management is very simple, very well documented. You push a couple of buttons, you're off to the races. So that's in Hibernate. Next is WebORB IDE integration. Let's go to this for that. So this is Hello World service. We just built that a few moments ago. And what I'm going to do now is use the WebORB plugin for Flash Builder to add a service to WebORB, another service beyond the Hello World service. So I'm going to connect to WebORB for .NET, but before I do that, let me go to where you need to go to install the plugin. So here's the WebORB for .NET 4.2.00. That's the latest release at the time I'm making this. That's its installation folder. And down here you'll see a folder called Integration. If you open that up, you'll find one for Flash Builder and another folder for Windows or Mac or whatever, and then the necessary installer for that operating system. So find that integration folder in your WebORB deployment and run the necessary setup, and then you will get this menu item in your Flash Builder installation. So we'll do connect to WebORB.net. Here's a list of exposed destinations, and I'll select this one because I know what it does. Now watch what happens over here on the Hello World service source code when I click this button. It goes whir, and whir, and look, there it is. It's added a new service right here, right, for the query database service. And down here on the data services tab, I see new information. Now, I'm going to do something here. It says get customers returns object. I'm going to configure the return type by auto-detecting the return type from sample data. I'll hit next, and it'll say, all right, we made the call to the server, and that's what we got back. That's the structure, the properties returned by the operation. We're going to name that the customer data type, and now get customers is said to return an array of customers. All right, to show another cool aspect of this, I'm going to go to my main.mxml file and open that up. Click the design view. Remember, that's all it has is invoking a string. I'm going to, let's see, make this a little bigger, like so, and find a data grid. Drop it in there, like so. Notice that it just has the default column 1, 2, and 3 for its column names. Now here's the cool part. I'm going to click on that service, drag it in, and drop it on the data grid, and it figures out what I'm trying to do is call this data query service. Say OK. All my columns get updated to reflect the names of the properties of the customer data type. And when I build this application, it fills it in with all the necessary information. Should have made it just a little wider, huh? So it's actually hitting the server-side service and getting the information back and filling up the columns with the returned information. So I was able to add that WebORB service and drag and drop it into my application. I think that's pretty awesome. A lot of that is Flash Builder, a lot of it is the plugin for WebORB. It's a pretty cool combination, and if you use Flash Builder every day, this can save you a ton of development time. Now there's a similar feature in Visual Studio. Let me close this solution. And I'm going to create a new project using this new cool tool called Amethyst from Sapphire Steel Software. It's very cool stuff. If you are a .NET developer and you are targeting Flex, then you owe it to yourself to check out Amethyst. Right? It is very cool. It's exactly what you need. All right, so we'll just click OK, and it's going to build a new project. All right, but look at down here. I got this WebORB service browser down here. I'm going to reload the services to make sure they're all up to date, and walk down here and say, wait, hey, look at that. I can import the Hello World service to this application just by hitting a button. And again, watch what happens in the project menu here. Wow, look at all that. A whole bunch of code got added. Not just the service code, but also the configuration files necessary to access the server-side code and generally do the right thing. Right? That is pretty awesome. Just a couple of button clicks and I've imported the WebORB service into my Flex application inside of Microsoft Visual Studio. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's a lot of other really cool stuff you can do with the combination of Visual Studio, Amethyst, and WebORB that I'm not going to go into in this presentation. This version of this version of Amethyst is not yet shipping, but you can get the beta version by going to sapphiressteel.com looking for Amethyst. It may be by the time you're watching this video it's available. Either way, you owe it to yourself to check it out if you're already familiar with Visual Studio. So that's number 9, use WebORB's IDE integration. And number 10, last but not least, is to use the latest version of WebORB. So let's go to the midnightcoders.com's website. And you should use the latest version of WebORB, whether that's WebORB for .NET, WebORB for PHP, WebORB for Java, whatever platform you're targeting, use the latest version. Now I know there's always a reluctance to switch from one tool version to another in the middle of a project, but we're fixing bugs left and right. We're expanding the services, things like Hibernate, things like the caching. And by using the latest version, even though there might be a little pain involved in switching from one to the other, you're not going to fight the same bugs we've already fixed. You're not going to have to implement things like caching that we've already solved for you. You can leverage the investment you've already made in Hibernate, and so on. Going with the latest version of WebORB for .NET is an absolutely great way to accelerate your time to market. And remember, the development version and the community edition are both free, so it isn't going to cost you anything to upgrade. And that's it. Those are 10 ways to accelerate your application development and improve performance using WebORB. Happy coding!